All right, open your Bibles with me, please, to the book of Proverbs. We're ready for a new book today. We've said goodbye to Psalms, and we're ready to move on here to Proverbs. Let me begin by saying Proverbs are not unique to Jews, of course. The Greeks had Proverbs and the Romans had Proverbs. All countries, as they learned how to write, discovered that some things worked better than others for keeping some semblance of order, of what was just and what was fair. So scholars find duplicates, if you would, of the Hebrew Proverbs in any number of other writings as well. Of course, when it speaks specifically about the Lord and gives the name Moses received at the burning bush, then that would be uniquely Jewish. But just the common sense sort of advice of how we get along with each other, what will tear apart our communities, that kind of knowledge was generally available in all the different cultures around the Mediterranean world. The Proverbs were not written at one time by any one person. There's an inscription right at the beginning that says, well, we know Solomon was such a wise person. Solomon must have written these. But scholars believe that is not the case, that the Hebrew language is of a much later period than King Solomon. Solomon may have written down some that got moved along century by century, but certainly the scroll as we have it today is not from the time of Solomon, it's from a later period. I read through the whole book again this week myself, every verse of every chapter, and I've highlighted things that I think will give you a flavor of the book. We won't do nearly the whole book. That's not our purpose this time through, but just to hit highlights. I will mention some things several times because I think the person who put this list together, or group of persons, thought some things were so important, they mentioned them a number of times, like, picky wives, contentious wives. It's mentioned any number of times. You'll see what a problem that's always been. Remember, the men wrote the book, okay? The men wrote the book. So there is no problem here with men, just contentious wives. Let's pray before we start. God, this is the day you have made. It's a beautiful November morning in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we thank you for it. And this is the book you have made, that you have found people down through the centuries who were willing to listen with their deepest heart as you whispered to them things that they ought to write down, things about you and things about us, how you initiate right relationship with you, and if we respond appropriately, we may know ourselves rightly related to you through your grace, through your chesed, your never-failing love for us. So we offer our best effort as we look at your book and try to find those things that are forever true about you and about us. And we offer our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. All right. Verse 2, chapter 1, verse 2. For learning about wisdom and instruction. And those few words really sum up what this book of Proverbs is all about. I told you that the Jews came to a point in their history where they felt they had been beaten over the head by any number of enemies through the centuries, so they must not be doing something right. There must be some way they could do better, and if they did do better, perhaps they would fare better. So they came to a period that's known in Hebrew history as the wisdom period. And this book is one of those that came out of the wisdom period. Ecclesiastes we'll get to next, and it came out of the wisdom period. And some of the Psalms, as I pointed out, the very first Psalm, you recall, is about wisdom. Being smart, not keep on doing the same old things the same old way and hoping you'll get a different result. You will not get a different result. You'll get the same result. So skip to verse 6. So to understand a proverb and a figure of speech, the words of the wise and their riddles. So You need to learn how to interpret what they're trying to say to you. Let's go in verse 8. Hear, my child, your father's instruction, and do not reject your mother's teaching. Now remember that Torah itself is a Hebrew word that means teaching or instruction. So not only has God instructed the Jews in the Torah, those first 5 scrolls, but one's father and one's mother take on the role of teaching as well. So your father has a Torah, your mother has a Torah, as it were, and you're supposed to pay close attention. Verse 9 tells you why. For they are a fair garland for your head, and pendants for your neck. My child, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us wantonly ambush the innocent. Go on to verse 13. We shall find all kinds of costly things. These are young people who are trying to lead others to steal. We shall fill our houses with booty, things they've taken from someone else. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse, my child. Do not walk in their way. Keep your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed blood. So even in the time of these authors, they were having trouble with certain of their young people who were being led astray. There have always been bad people who wanted to entice other people to come and be bad with them. It's not a new thing. It's been around as long as there have been people, good ones and bad ones. Skip to verse 22. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? And we have a word, simple-minded, if you would. Why do you insist on being simple-minded? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? Scoffers are people who just see no joy, no happiness in anything. Everything is, they frown upon. Pretend it doesn't really matter to them. Things aren't going to be better. Things are only going to be worse. They just never find a hopeful word about anything. Verse 24. Because I have called and you refused, have stretched out my hand and no one heeded, and because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when panic strikes you. When panic strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose to stand in awe of the I am who I am, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and be sated with their own devices. For waywardness kills the simple, and the complacency of fools destroys them. So a plea here in the very first chapter. Learn. Be smart. Don't follow people who offer you the easy way, because it's not the good way. The good way requires a lot of hard work and diligence. And as we go through, you're going to see how many times these proverbs, some of them repeated again and again, talk about people who are lazy, looking for the easy way. Don't want to work for what they have. They want to take from somebody else. So don't follow those who say, only stupid people work hard. The rest of us just wait and take from them whatever they have. Instead, follow your mother and father, the Torah, the teachings of your mother and father. They will lead you in the right way. Okay, look at chapter 2. My child, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, if you indeed cry out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures. Then you will understand what it means to stand in awe of the I am who I am and find the knowledge of Elohim. For the I am who I am gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Skip to verse 9. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Okay? Now look at the words here, back in verse 9. These are elemental, fundamental, so important. You'll see as we go through the Proverbs that this is, as we would say, not rocket science, not brain surgery. This ought to be pretty simple. That is, God wants people to stand right with each other. And you don't stand right with somebody if you're taking what belongs to them. If you take their property, if you take their life, you don't stand right. Justice, we'll come to several that talk about fair scales, weights, and measures. It just means what's fair. That we want fairness for everybody, and that's emphasized in the word equity. It comes from the same root as equal. Everybody wants to be treated the same. The same. No partiality. Not being treated well just for some, being treated poorly for others. Right standing, justice, equity, every good path. And then the understanding that knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. The teachings of God should bring great joy. Not that you feel confined, not that you feel enslaved, but Charles Wesley wrote a hymn about when we feel that we are a captive, make me a captive, Lord. When God captures us, if you will, then we are truly set free. God wants life to be bigger and fuller and richer. And the only reason He teaches us to rein in our passions and control them so that they do not impede on someone else's rights, somebody else's right to be treated fairly. Okay, go to verse 20. Therefore walk in the way of the good, and keep to the paths of the just. For the upright will abide, remain in the land, and the innocent will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it like a weed, if you would. My child, do not forget my Torah, but let your heart keep my commandments. Skip to verse 5. Trust in the I am who I am with all your heart. See, that's very much like the Shema that we've talked about in Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the I am who I am, your Elohim is one. You must have no other Elohim but Him. You must love Him with all your heart and mind and soul and strength. So here, verse 5, trust in the I am who I am. Remember that in English, trust and faith are really synonyms. To have faith is to trust. To trust is to have faith. Okay. So trust that the I am who I am is leading you the right way. This is the right way for life to be lived. Do not rely on your own insight. I remember so very well a couple of teenage brothers I talked to almost 5 years ago now. And I knew other family members who are pillars of this church. I mean, they're just here every time the door opens. And this woman's brother is the father of these two teenage boys. And her brother grew up in a Methodist church in another town in Oklahoma, as did she. And their parents were just pillars of the church. But the brother, her brother, just never goes. Never. And for one special occasion, the family, mom and dad, the grandparents, were here from out of town. And so to all go have lunch together, they all came to church together. And I called on the family to see if I could help them become more active here. And I finally decided I was going to have no luck with the mom and dad. I decided to focus on the two teenage boys, see if they would talk to me. And I called them. And I asked for the younger, asked for the older, and talked with them. They did listen to me. But the answer that I finally got from each of them was, our dad thinks we should not make a choice. We should consider all the possibilities. All the possibilities. And I said, but here you are, a senior in high school. You're 18. And you haven't been taught all the possibilities. You have not been taught in the church. You've not been taught in Sunday school. You've not participated. How can you reject Christianity when you don't really know what it is? Well, I'm still looking. And I said, really? Where? Well, just everywhere. I'm just looking everywhere. Well, you aren't going to find it everywhere. You're going to find it where this all-important book is taught by people who come from a long tradition of very good colleges, universities, graduate schools, who really understand how the book was put together, what it's trying to say. You need to be where people of faith are dealing with the all-important book, week after week. I had no luck. None. None. Do not rely on your own insight. Occasionally people say to me, well, I'm not religious. I don't go to church. I can think about God when I jog along the river. It's not enough. It's not enough. Just to observe nature is not to be led to nature's God or to understand nature's God. There's a reason why this is called the Biblos, the book. Because this is as close as we get. I mean, we have scholars every couple of generations that decide they will set up a new search for the historical Jesus. The Jesus Seminar, it was organized in 1985 by Father Crossan and others, decided we will find the historical Jesus. And when they got through, almost always, the group looking finds a Jesus who looks like them. Almost always. The group looking finds a Jesus who looks like them. But all agree the only place you're going to find out about Jesus is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's it. No one else wrote about him in his time, in that first century. No one else described anything about what it was first, from birth to death and beyond. We have this book. And in this book, 4 Gospels, by reading all 4 and having people teach you who've spent a lifetime with this, I mean, I've been in the church all my life. And I still read the best books I can possibly find. I mean, if you really want to understand John's Gospel, for example, wouldn't you want to read Dr. Raymond Brown's books? He taught on John's Gospel for 40 years at Yale Divinity School and produced 2 volumes. Gee, they must be 750 pages each. 1,500 pages, say, after 40 years of dealing with just one book. Rather than saying, well, I learn about God jogging down by the river. You have to put yourself in the right places to learn from people who know something, who can teach you. Who can teach you. Where did they go to school? I'm amazed when I hear stories on television and all about people who rush out and get surgeries done by people who are not board certified. Does that make any sense to you? Any sense to you that somebody would go and have surgery on any part of your body by somebody who's not board certified. There's a reason why we have board certifications, who let people work on our bodies and work on our minds who don't have proper credentials. There's a reason why it usually costs more to send your kid to a college or university where everybody teaching in that university has the terminal degree in his or her specialty. The terminal degree in his or her specialty. You can go to huge state universities sometimes where you're in a freshman class of 1,000 students being taught by a graduate assistant. Or would you rather go to some of our Methodist universities and others where there are 10 students, 12 students taught by somebody with a PhD in that subject? You see? Do not rely on your own insight. There are people who can teach you, who've spent a lifetime in some small area, really focusing in. Of course, you need what you can glean from that, and what you can glean from this, and what you can glean from that, and so on. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. All right, here we are in estimate of giving time. Look at verse number 9. Honor the I am who I am with your substance, and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. That goes a little far, see? A little far. You and I see TV preachers who tell you that's a fact. It's going to happen. You be generous, you'll get very rich. You give a dime, God gives you back 10. That was the deal, you remember, that Jacob wanted to make with God after he was running for his life. Esau right behind him. And Jacob went to sleep with his head on a rock and dreamed of angels ascending and descending on a ladder from heaven, and got up the next morning and said to God, well, I didn't know you were here. I'm so glad to know you're here. If you'll help me go safely where I'm going and bring me safely home again to my mother and father and make me a really wealthy man, I give you 10%. And I heard a rabbi preach on that passage one time and say, you'll note God didn't respond. Gail and I do give 10% to this church. In addition, we give to every Methodist college and seminary I've ever driven past, I think, that has me on their list. But it isn't because I think God's going to make me really rich. You know, I don't see that I put in and so God will give more. I do believe God blesses generous givers, but they don't all get rich. I was taught from the time I was very small that my mom and dad were giving 10%. They were. I mean, every year when our card came for the family, the 5 of us sat down together. And Mom and Dad would talk about that. And then they would fill out the card for the nearest, say, $10 a month, whatever that figure was, and then there'd be $3 or $4 and a change or something, and they'd put that in a jar up in the cabinet every month, and it was understood that was the Sunday school money. You could take money out and put it in the collection plate at Sunday school and so on, but the bulk of it went to the church. So I believe God does reward us because we learn how significant everything we have is when we're giving the first portion always back to the Lord. I think it puts all the rest in proper perspective. I don't think everybody who gives generously gets really rich. Rich in the heart, rich in the soul, rich in the spirit, not always rich at the bank. Verse 11, my child, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of His reproof. For Yahweh reproves the one He loves, as a father the son in whom He delights. So the 10 Commandments are partly about things we ought to do, and they're partly about things we ought not to do. And we've read already in 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, what happens to children who have parents who never say no, who've never heard the word no. Discipline is important, very important. I watch Gail sometimes, and she does this wonderfully well. Really does it wonderfully well. We went down to Texas for Thanksgiving, and little grandchildren were making too much noise early one morning, and their mom and dad hadn't gotten out of the bed yet. Gail and I were both up, and Gail walked over to one. Of course, she knows how old they are, but she asked, "How old are you?" "I'm 8. "And you're about to sit in the corner for 8 minutes. "How old are you?" "I'm 5. "Okay, you're going to sit for 5 minutes. "How old are you?" 3. "You're going to sit 3 minutes. And then when they had sat, she walked to each one individually and talked to them. "Do you understand why I ask you to sit by yourself 3 minutes? Do you understand?" And then she hugged her. 5 minutes? "Do you understand?" Then she hugged her. 8 minutes. "Do you understand?" And she hugged her. And then she said, "The next one who comes running about one of the other, both in the chairs again." Things quietened down. It was wonderful. We finished our breakfast, and I said, where they didn't hear me, "Super Nanny would have been proud of you." She would have been proud of you. "Do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof, for the Lord reproves the one he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights." They're yeses and they are no's. "No, that's not appropriate. No, that's not appropriate." Let me help you move to what's appropriate. All right, let's skip a whole bunch of that chapter and get to verse 30. Skip to verse 30. Still chapter 3. "Do not quarrel with anyone without cause when no harm has been done to you. Do not envy the violent, and do not choose any of their ways." And how often now we hear about road rage? People who just let their emotions run wild. Berserk. Just run berserk. If we support violence, if we condone violence, we will have more and more violence. If we exhibit it in front of our children and our grandchildren, we'll have more violence. It's an easy thing to give into. It's an easy thing to give into. It is so destructive. Go to chapter 4. "Listen, children, to a father's instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, and my mother's favorite, he taught me and said to me, 'Let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live.'" So again, it's about instruction. Do not run from instruction. Listen carefully, and it will help you. Skip to verse 13. "Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go." And here it feminizes it. "Guard her," that is instruction, "for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of those who stand right is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day." A rising sun, everything getting brighter and better. All right, chapter 5. We're going to deal with a loose woman at this point. Remember, it's being written by men. It's being written by men. Now, you also need to remember that this was a very different world from the one you and I live in. You get a clearer understanding if you look at some of the practices in Islamic countries. Listen to me. You get a clear understanding if you look at life in some Islamic countries. That is, we hear today about Islamic women in some countries who have no rights, cannot drive a car, are not to leave their house without being completely covered all but their eyes. They're to go in groups, not individually. You see, the Jewish women you and I know are not lesser citizens by any means, not put upon by their husbands or families. That's not the case now. But in the Bible, even as late as Jesus' time, a woman out on the street by herself was assumed to be a prostitute. When Jesus met the woman at the well of Samaria, scholars keep reminding you that wasn't natural. For one woman to be out there by herself at midday at the well. Not natural. She should have been with other women. Should have been with other women. Not a woman out there all by herself. Okay. So women had virtually no rights except within the home. And so when we read here about unfaithfulness, it's the wife who's considered unfaithful, you see. She's supposed to be at home, acting nice. And there are women who entice men, so these are the women with loose lips. All right. Described here as such. Chapter 5, verse 3. For the lips of a loose woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. How many folks do we find in the media saying, you know, it didn't start that way. It didn't start that way. How many men and women out in the marketplace, in the workplace, talk about things one man and one woman ought not to talk about when they're not really related to each other? Well, she understood me. She listened. He understood me. He listened. And what was so innocent in the beginning became adultery. I mean, the Bible is very clear about it. When a married person has sex with someone to whom he or she is not married, it's adultery. That's the word. It often begins so seemingly innocently when people allow themselves to do things with a member of the opposite sex that grown people can't do without getting drawn in. I remember years ago when Dr. Charlie Shedd wrote his best-selling book. It really was a big seller then, Letters to Karen. His daughter was getting married. She was away at school, senior year, and had a summer wedding planned after graduation. And she said, Dad, you've counseled people all these years. He was a Presbyterian preacher, if you don't remember Charlie Shedd. You've counseled people all these years. What do you tell them? What do you tell all these people you've been counseling? And he said, well, let me think about that. I'll write you a letter and tell you. So he wrote a letter, and then he thought of some more things. And he wrote another letter, and he thought of some more things. He wrote another letter. And when the wedding came, she said, Dad, every girl ought to get to read these. And so he published it, Letters to Karen, on keeping love in marriage. And when one of his sons was getting married, he said, Dad, how about for guys? And I still remember one of the things in that book to his son. He said, right now, just before you get married, you think you will never look at another woman again. Well, let me tell you something. One day after you're married, you're going to be walking down the street, and some long-legged thing is going to walk past you who smells really good. and you're going to turn and let your eyes follow her down the street. But let me tell you something. You can't keep the birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from nesting in your hair. Be sure that when you get home that afternoon, you say to your wife, I saw a long-legged, beautiful girl at noon today who smells so good, and I wished I could come right home to you. It seems to begin so well, and it ends so poorly. Verse 8, keep your way far from her, this woman with the loose lips, and do not go near the door of her house. Verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Verse 18, let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. The understanding, even though wives had very few rights, one of them was supposed to be very clear in Judaism. If you use up her youthfulness when she's pretty and thin, she ought to be able to know she can count on you the rest of her life. But you'll be there. You'll be there for her the rest of her life. Verse 20, why should you be intoxicated, my son, by another woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For human ways are under the eyes of the I am who I am, and he examines all their paths. Today we talk about how many cameras are seeing us all the time, how many cameras are watching all the time. And way back there, this writer says, God sees everything. Don't forget, God sees everything. All right, chapter 6. Now we get to one of these passages about hard work. And you recall that as the Jews were scattered over the face of the earth, they were dispersed more than once. I heard a Jewish comedian say one time, you know what a Jewish dropout is? A kid who has only a master's degree. And then he went on to say, we discovered that if we were the only doctor in town, we got treated better. If we were the best teacher in town, we got treated better. If we were the only dentist, if we were the smartest lawyer, we got treated better. So education became so important. Education. And the other part of that, of course, was work. Work. Do not be satisfied with being mediocre. Well, you can see where some of that comes from here in Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, you lazy bones. Consider its ways and be wise. Without having any chief or officer or ruler, that is, no one's bossing it around, it prepares its food in summer and gathers its sustenance in harvest. How long will you lie there, O lazy bones? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed warrior. Okay. You have to work. Verse 27. We're back to unfaithfulness here. Unfaithfulness will destroy your community. That's what they were trying to remind each other. It will destroy our community. So this time it approaches it from this way. Verse 27, can fire be carried in the bosom without burning one's clothes? Can one walk on hot coals without scorching the feet? So is he who sleeps with his neighbor's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. Verse 32, He who commits adultery has no sense. He who does it destroys himself. Okay? Chapter 7. Let's go to verse 4. General instructions again first. Say to wisdom. Remember, this is all about being wise, not being foolish. Being instructed, not being uninformed. So say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend, that they may keep you from the loose woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. For at the window of my house I looked out through my lattice, and I saw among the simple ones, simpletons is our word, simpleton here, I observed among the youths a young man without sense passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. Then a woman comes toward him, decked out like a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with impudent face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. So now I've come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I've decked my couch with coverings, colored spreads of Egyptian linen. I've perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's take our fill of love until morning. Let's delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. He will not come home until full moon. With much seductive speech, she persuades him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. Right away he follows her and goes like an ox to the slaughter, or bounds like a stag toward the trap until an arrow pierces its entrails. He is like a bird rushing into a snare, not knowing it will cost him his life. How seriously did the wise of their day take adultery? Pretty seriously, I would say. Okay, let's go to chapter 8. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portal, she cries out, To you, O people, I call, and my call is to all that live. Skip to verse 22. The I am who I am created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of long ago. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth. When he had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle in the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep. Remember, still a flat earth, water above the canopy and water underneath the ground. When he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master worker, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the human race. And what was it that was there from the beginning? Wisdom. Wisdom. Before God created anything else and everything else, he created wise ways to live, as opposed to foolish ways to live. Proper, improper. Wisdom. Right from the beginning. She's It's personified as a woman in Scripture. Wisdom is a woman, but a proper woman, of course. A woman from whom we all should learn wisdom. All right. Let's skip a little bit. Go to chapter 10. Now, we're going to find here again some times when he says almost the same thing as he said before. So he's collecting material, if you would, and comes across these various sayings, and they seem very similar, because they are, of course. Chapter 10, verse 4. This is about laziness again. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. A child who gathers in summer is prudent, but a child who sleeps in harvest brings shame. Gail and I drove home from Texas. And you know, one of the things we talk about, who pitches in and helps and who doesn't? Who pitches in and helps and who doesn't? How many of the younger generation see what's going on in the kitchen before and after and volunteer or just come quietly? Which ones don't? One of my nephews has a wife. They're one of the ones that lives in San Antonio. And the first 2 or 3 times Gail and I were around her, we decided we like her very much. She's quiet. She doesn't make any big noises about what she's doing. She doesn't say, look at me, look how hard I'm working. But she is. She is. I mean, she just eases into the kitchen and she's there. You know, right through to the cleanup time. She's right there. One of my nephews, Friday, we're trying to get everything sort of put back together, and some of us are going to start leaving after lunch on Friday. And one of my nephews, Gail and I both noticed, we didn't say anything to each other at the time, but on the way home, I said, did you notice all that Brian was doing this morning? And she said, I love that. She said, yes. They've got one little girl. She's 8 now, but he was sweeping and mopping and setting up little chairs and folding up things that we weren't going to need anymore and so on. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. When Mike Chafin became our district superintendent, Bishop usually makes appointments, effective June 1. So Mike became our district superintendent on June 1, 7 years ago. And when our first group of campers came back from Camp Egan, you know what they were saying? Do you know our new district superintendent? At that point, I didn't know him well. I said, I've met him. Wow, they said. He was mopping and picking up trash and setting up chairs and taking down chairs. They were amazed. A district superintendent, this person who sits right at the right hand of the bishop, was doing whatever needed doing. And for 7 years, new people go to events where they see Mike Chafin and they say, wow, the district superintendent is such a nice person. If he sees something that needs doing, he makes no big deal about it. He just does it. He picks up things that have been spilled or mops up or sweeps up or, chairs need moving. He's the first one there. Don't we all like that kind of person? Well, that's what it's getting at here. Same kind of thing. Chapter 11. Here again it gets to very practical things. What impacted the lives of common people? And it's fair measures and weights in the marketplace, where rich people take advantage of poor. Sometimes, not all, some. A false balance is an abomination to the I am who I am. But an accurate weight is his delight. You see how simple a thing that is? Yet how profound that is if you are the poor person who's putting your one little coin out there and needing as much food as you can take home for your family, Whether that scale is accurate or not is very important. Very. And it shifts to another. When pride comes, then comes disgrace. But wisdom is with the humble. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. Skip down to verse 12. I'm just sort of hitting a few highlights here. Whoever belittles another lacks sense, but an intelligent person remains silent. Intelligent folks don't have to talk all the time. A gossip goes about telling secrets, but one who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a confidence. Verse 15, to guarantee loans for a stranger brings trouble, but there is safety in refusing to do so. This one's mentioned a number of times now before we get to the end. Do not sign on to guarantee somebody else's note, their loan. I have a brother who's a banker. I have two nephews who are bankers. Bankers love to loan money to people who are going to pay it back. If they can't get a loan at the bank, I would recommend you not loan to them either. If you want to give somebody something, that's one thing. Don't count it alone. Don't count it alone. Look a little farther here. Verse 18. The wicked earn no real gain, but those who sow right standing get a true reward. Look at verse 24. Some give freely, yet grow all the richer. Others withhold what is due and only suffer want. A generous person will be enriched, and one who gives water will get water. Chapter 12, verse 10. Now here it shifts to something else very practical. In this country, we've decided we need a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals. We have such an organization because we find that not all people are kind to animals. Some people are hateful, mean, cruel. And here, way back there, they already knew how important this was. Verse 10, the righteous know the needs of their animals, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. Those who till their land, that is, if you go to the trouble, plow, plant, and weed, will have plenty of food, but those who follow worthless pursuits have no sense. Verse 16, fools show their anger at once, but the prudent ignore an insult. My mother taught me when I was a little boy. You've heard me say this before, but it still comes to my mind. And that was a long time ago when I was a little boy. You cannot be offended if you refuse to take offense. You cannot be offended if you refuse to take offense. Okay? Look at verse 19. Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue lasts only a moment. How important truth was then, how important truth is now. Look at verse 22. Lying lips are an abomination to the I am who I am, but those who act faithfully are his delight. So it mentions something that's good and something that's bad, and then follows up by saying, and guess what? God knows, God watches, God pays attention. We're going to have to stop. I got to go and read my prayers. So I'm going to put down next Sunday will be December 5, and we'll be at Proverbs 13. And we should be able to finish and perhaps get right on into Ecclesiastes. If you haven't been to church, don't rush off.